Welcome to the Rock and Roll Show podcast. We're here to share the magic of experiencing live music together with strangers and with friends, and to get to know our guests a little bit better through their concert experience. I'm your host, Alex Gadd, and I do this because I love talking about live music with people. Finding out what bands someone likes and what shows they've been to allows us to get to know one another and understand one another a little bit better. Also, it's just fun to swap stories about shows we've seen over the years. Our guest today is Charlie Trantanella, who spent a career as an engineer, additionally spent 2 years as a substitute math teacher. He's written 3 books, including a memoir entitled Sister Christian Has Left the Building, and has recorded 3 albums of original music with a fourth one on the way. Finally, he's an old high school friend of mine. He's a real Renaissance man. Charlie, welcome to the show.
Alex, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and see you again after all these years.
Let's start with just how you got into music. And your book covers some of this, but if you could just go into the highlights of it.
Sure, music was part of my life as far back as I can remember. Neither of my parents were musicians, but they played a lot of music, especially when we drove in the car. We lived in suburbia. You had to drive everywhere. I had 3 younger sisters. We were always going somewhere. And so when it was with my mom in the station wagon, it was a steady dose of 70s AM pop radio. I still love that music when I hear it today. And with my dad, he had an in-dash 8-track tape player. And he had a great collection of eclectic collection of 8-tracks. You know, the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Chet Atkins, Perry Como. And I still love just playing with the 8-track machine, or the cassettes, and skipping tracks and everything. I thought it was such cool technology. But then the neighborhood I grew up in, it was a great kind of this cul-de-sac neighborhood, and there were kids of all ages. And I was in the middle of the age group there. And so when I was about 9 or 10 years old, some of the older kids had discovered arena rock music, hard rock music, be like the mid-70s. And they started telling me, you got to listen to WPLJ 95.5 out of New York. If you like music, you got to listen to this rock music. My parents had a stereo in their living room. It was tuned to Easy 108, and you did not touch it because it was an analog tuner. If you touched it and you moved away, it might never come back. But one day I decided I got to listen to this WPLJ, hear what everyone's talking about. And so I turned the dial and somehow locked it in. And I remember that first day, I heard about a half hour I listened to it, and I heard bands I'd never heard before. Led Zeppelin, Queen, Jethro Tull, Boston, all these great AOR bands that were playing on WPLJ at the time. And to me, that kind of just opened this door of some wonderful music to me that I didn't know existed. And I was hooked from then on. And so
Yeah.
and I wasn't the only one. I had a good friend who lived across the street, Brett McGuire. He was my age. And we both fell in love with hard rock music. And we both decided at 9 years old, we're going to be musicians. We're going to be hard rockers. That's our goal in life. And Brett decided on the guitar right away. And I kind of like both the sound of the guitar and the drums. So I said, I'm going to be a drummer. Brett can be the guitarist. I'll be the drummer. And run up to my mom and say, Mom, I've decided I want to be a drummer. Can I go get a drum set? And if you can imagine the thought of bringing a drum set into a small house for a young kid, my mom gave me that's nice. We'll think about it. And I never became a drummer. But I would listen to WPLJ as much as I could. I had friends in the neighborhood who would introduce me to other styles of music. But I got my big musical break in 5th grade at Roxbury Elementary School. And one day, all 5th graders called down to the cafeteria. We're going to take a test. I'm like, oh, great, another test. And we had standardized testing was a big part of my elementary education. So I was expecting this just to be another horrible experience. But instead, it was a musical test. It was called the Musical Aptitude Test by Edward Gordon, who was a pioneer researcher into innate musical ability. He came up with this test that involved a lot of listening, and he'd play 2 rhythms. If the rhythms were the same, you marked it one way or different. He'd play different notes, if they went up or down, different volume level. And it was all on a Scantron sheet. The headphones on, sitting in the cafeteria, listening to sounds and tones, not music. It was just sounds and rhythms and marking this Scantron sheet. And after a while, I thought, wow, this is really easy. It just made sense to me. And so we took the test, didn't think about it. And then about 2 weeks later, I want to say most of the 5th grade class got called back into the cafeteria. And we were told, sit on the bench. We've got some great news for you. You all did really well on this musical aptitude test. So that means you get to play an instrument. We're going to teach you an instrument. You'll be part of the elementary school band. And I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. And so we're all sitting lined up on this bench against the wall, and they assign us our instrument. They had couple people I've never seen before, along with some teachers, and they start down at the far end and they just start assigning instruments to people. The first person, flute, second person, trombone, tuba. And I was towards the end of the line, and I'm just sitting there going, please say drums. I want to be a drummer. I remember that the guy gets to me and he looks me in the eye and just goes, trumpet, and then moves on. And that was it. And I became a trumpet player. They handed me a little slip of paper so I could go rent my instrument. And within a week or two, I was trying to make sound out of a trumpet and struggling immensely. But that was my formal introduction. So that during that year, I learned how to read music. I learned how to play some tunes and things like that. And I was expected at that point to stick with it through elementary school and then in middle school to go join the marching band and the concert band. And I did because, yeah, you were told you're seventh grader, you play the trumpet, you're in the band. Okay. And that was okay. Marching band was a thing unto itself. But what I really liked about the middle school aspect was they had jazz band. My father was really into jazz, but it never really sat well with me when I listened to it. It was the big band era from the 40s and 50s. And it didn't connect with me until I got to try out for jazz band and get into the jazz band. I think it was eighth grade. I finally made it into jazz band. And that was a lot of fun. The music was a lot better than what we normally played in middle school band, which was a lot of Herb Alpert and kind of mellow tunes arranged for a very bad middle school band. So simple stuff. But jazz band was a lot of fun. So I really enjoyed it. I started listening more to it and really trying to play the trumpet at that point. But I struggled with the trumpet my entire life. It's a lot of, there's valves to give you different notes, but you really have to be careful about your pitch.
Yeah.
And if I thought about it, I could never hit pitch.
So that's a lot of stuff. We start with easy listening music, easy 108, and a little bit of the 70s easy rock, adult contemporary rock. And then you get into hard rock when you hear PLJ. And then in order to go become a musician and immerse yourself in it, you end up going to the trumpet. So how do you square all those circles when you're a young guy? Because I remember almost the exact same origin story. My folks would drive around it with adult contemporary music, AM pop radio. And my mom was into the Beatles. So I got into the Beatles through her and the Stones, but it was really mostly pop music. But I dove into NEW and
Oh,
PLJ. So I was listening to those right away. And I was like, I got to play guitar. And you said drums. At no point in the story do you play drums. Is that correct?
that's correct. I have maybe banged on a drum once or twice in my life, and I was horrible at it. But yeah.
Yeah. So do you have a first favorite band? When you switched on with WPLJ, you mentioned a number of bands in the book. Which band was your first band?
That would have to be Led Zeppelin. I know that was one of the first bands I heard when I first turned into WPLJ. And it was a song like Ramble On or Whole Lotta Love or something. I heard that and it was like, wow, this is music that exists, and it blew me away. And so I love Jimmy Page's guitar playing, and I would gravitate a lot more to the guitar playing when I heard a lot of these songs. Queen, I really love Queen, but I love Brian May's guitar in Queen.
Right.
And bands like Jethro Tull, I would key on the guitar as opposed to the flute. And the flute was very front and center there with Ian Anderson. But the guitar always just held this connection to me, and the drums at the same time too.
Mhm.
But like I said, those two instruments in particular really just, it got to me. And I think I picked the drums mainly because my friend picked the guitar. And we were both like, we're going to be rock stars. We could be rock stars together.
So you're into Led Zeppelin, you get thrown into band, you're learning music on the trumpet, you get into jazz band. To me, jazz bands seem painfully uncool. But reading your book, I realized how it opened you up to learning much more about music in general because you were playing more advanced pieces, as you noted. You're playing with better players because it's the advanced portion of the group of students who play music in school. So you got to play jazz, and that helped your playing. Did it help you learn theory?
I think so. I think certainly melody. The one thing about the trumpet, you can't play harmony with a single trumpet, right? You need multiple
Right.
players. And so I learned a lot about melody, and it definitely helped my sight reading because I remember getting the jazz charts and they're just notes everywhere and accidentals everywhere. And it's very imposing at first, but learning how to deal with that with the language of music um, definitely helped the theory aspect of it. In terms of chord theory and harmony, that really came out when I started playing the guitar. That's when it really started to make sense to me.
I want to take a detour just to check in. What was your first concert that you saw?
So The first concert I paid for to see was a triple bill down in Virginia. I was with 5 of my buddies. We were big Dungeons and Dragons gamers.
One of the best stories in the book is that story about taking that weekend trip down to Virginia.
Yeah, so one of our crew had moved to Virginia, so he invited us down for the weekend, and there was going to be a concert at William and Mary. He lived very close to the College of William and Mary. He said, so we're going to go. It's The Alarm opening for Stevie Ray Vaughan, opening for the Pretenders. And it's general admission, and the tickets were $8.
Oh
Certainly
my
no more
God,
than
yes.
$10.
How old were you?
That was 84. I was 16.
Okay.
And I remember being excited for months on end. And we show up, and it's being general admission. You have to get there early to get your seat. And my buddy who lived there, he knew exactly where to go. He's going to run in. We're going to go upstairs. We're going to get to the balcony. It was in the field house of William and Mary. We're going to get to the balcony right at the front row. So we're going to have the stage will be maybe 50, 60 feet away from us. We'll have a perfect view, no one in front of us, because the floor was going to be mobbed with people.
Mob seat.
And we had the best seats, center stage right there on the balcony, front row. I remember that most about that concert more than any other concert I've ever been to in my life. Just all 3 bands coming on stage, kind of some of the songs they played. And I wasn't that big into The Alarm. They were loud, which was fun. You're at a concert, loud, it's enveloping. With Stevie Ray Vaughan, I had started listening to him about 6 months prior. I heard him for the first time. And so when he came on and took the stage, it was magic. The guy was just incredible. And I remember my friend Andy turning to me and going, oh, this guy's a monster. And at the time, you call a guitar player a monster. That was the best compliment you could give them.
Right.
He was doing it all, playing behind the back, swinging the guitar around, playing with his teeth. And it was just fantastic. They were just a trio at that point. Just Stevie Ray Vaughan in trouble.
Yep.
And so he played for about 40 minutes. And then the Pretenders came on, and they were very good too. They had some tune. I think it was
Middle of the Road was the big hit.
Middle of the Road was the big hit. Yeah, it was
Learning to Crawl was the record they were touring.
Yeah.
I saw him that year at a Radio City Music Hall with The Alarm opening, but no, I wish I had gotten Stevie Ray Vaughan in the middle.
They were fantastic because I knew a lot of their songs and everything, but I just remember thinking, wow, their guitarist is no Stevie Ray Vaughan. They put on a great show, though, the Pretenders. They were tight. Their sound was impeccable, and they knew how to work the crowd, which was a lot of fun.
She was great. Chrissy Hine, one of the great band leaders and woefully under-recognized and underappreciated. You go to see this show in Virginia, 3 great bands. I think The Alarm is a great band too. When you left that show, were you more motivated to be a musician than you were when you got there?
I think so.
Ready
I was
by then,
playing.
right?
I had already played out at my first Battle of the Bands. I was in a new band now that would become my quintessential high school band called Illusion. That was forming. So I was all in at that point. I was like, this is what I want to keep doing this. And then as best as you could as a high school kid, which for me was the Battle of the Bands in the gym.
So let's talk about the Battle of the Bands. Your first experience with playing out was you saw a Battle of the Bands, if I'm not mistaken, and you said, that's how I'm going to do this. This is my path.
Yes.
And I just have to find a band. So how did you find your first band? Now, at this point, are you playing guitar?
So one battle that I remember that was transformative, I'd been playing guitar for about a year, and I was barely passable guitar player. I didn't have a great instrument. I had just purchased my Telecaster, so I was still definitely struggling with the basics. But so I saw the Battle of the Bands. I knew a lot of the people playing because they were in the Westhill High School marching band with me in the concert band. And so I said, how do you do it? Well, I guess you just go find musicians. That was probably on a Friday or Saturday night. I went to school that Monday. I said, oh, I know a kid named Jay. He plays drums. I'm going to go ask him. And because I see him every morning, our lockers were near each other. So I run up to him all excited. Jay, do you want to form a band? We could play in the Battle of the Bands. I'm probably rattling off 100 miles an hour with everything. And he just looks at me and goes, no, I'm not really interested. I don't want to. But I know a drummer who's looking to form a band. And he had a friend named Jimmy Einer. And I knew Jimmy peripherally. He was a year below me in school. And I think Jay introduced us and we were like, want to form a band? Okay. And so we were a band. It was the 2 of us. And I would start going over his house to jam. And it was learning how to be in a band. That was our first kind of 3 or 4 months together. He was the drummer. I was the guitarist. Neither of us sung, but we found some common ground. We were both into the Police. And so we started playing some Police tune. We started playing some of the easier Van Halen tunes that didn't require me to shred. And, we did that for a few months, but we were going nowhere. But, looking back, it was learning how to be in a band, how to just work with another person and get timing down and get the music down. And so we go back to school my junior year, so the fall of '84, and I see this announcement come out a couple weeks into school. Battle of the Band, November, sign up now. And go, Jimmy, we got to do it. We got to do it. We got to find other people that somehow we got to get in this battle of bands. I'm like, this is how we get to big time. We play in the gym and everybody loves us and it's great. And he was into it too, but we didn't really able to coalesce around finding anyone else. Then we got our lucky break. There was another band at West Hill made up of some guys in the marching band, and they were a heavy metal group that just formed. But their bass player and their drummer weren't going to be available for a couple of weeks. I think they were in another band finishing up or something. And with the Battle of Bands coming, they're like, we can't play that. So they needed a drummer and a bass player. And one of the kids in the band knew Jimmy. They asked Jimmy, "You want to be the drummer?" He said, "Yeah." He says, I got another guy. He can play bass guitar. And so they signed me up. I'd never played bass guitar before. I knew it, 4 strings. I know the note. They hand me a Fender Precision bass, this kind of beat up cassette with some Judas Priest and Black Sabbath tunes. And they're like, learn them. There was no music, no sheet music,
Right.
no anything. And
And
I just,
no internet, may I point out, to
no,
get tabs from.
to get that, or even just to hear the songs. I knew of Black Sabbath and Judas Priest, but I look at the list of songs. I don't know any of these tunes. I'd never heard them. I went home and I had a little boom box. So I put the cassette on, sat there in the room with the bass guitar, which probably weighed about as much as I did. And I learned a few of the tunes, and I went to the rehearsal, the first rehearsal, and I guess I did all right. They said, "All right, we're the band. We are now Mayhem." And we rehearsed. Again, I enjoyed it, but I knew right away I was not a heavy metal bassist. These guys were totally into the look, the flash. We had 2 guitarists and a singer, and then Jimmy on drums and me on bass. And the 2 guitarists were great. They knew how to shred. They knew how to do the theatrics. And I was just looking at going, wow, I don't belong here. They need a bass player, and so I'll do it. And I got excited about it. We passed the audition. It helped that the band leader at high school ran the Battle of the Bands, and so he tended to favor kids that were in the marching band. 6 or 7 bands auditioned. It was always bands that had marching band kids in it that made the cut. And so we were the opening act for this night. And a little different, though. It was going to be in the auditorium. Previous ones had been in the gym, where each band gets their own little section on the gym floor. This was going to be in the auditorium, and it was going to be a moving progression of you start on stage left, you go on, play, and you get stage right. And I was just, how is this going to work? Because we have every band just shows up with more equipment than they need. How are we going to do this? But we were the first band, so we got to set up on stage first, which was good. And I had a borrowed guitar. I had a borrowed bass amp that was taller than me. So I had nothing to do. And I just remember sitting around, watching everybody set up and tune, and I was just scared to death that I was going to mess up, play a bad note, forget the song, stop at the wrong spot. And my getup wasn't helping me because I had to dress as a heavy metal rocker. So I had tight jeans on and this patterned geometric shirt without sleeves, and I had no muscles in my arm. And I had a dog collar, right, that I had borrowed from a friend of mine, a spiked dog collar.
Sorry I missed that year's Battle of the Bands.
So I felt really foolish. I looked like everybody else in the band, but I felt foolish. And then we do our sound check, and that was a little nerve-wracking, but it was okay. And then the auditorium starts filling with people, and I'm just nervous as anything. And we get called on stage, and I just remember standing in front of my amp with the bass going, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. And then we start with the Hellion by Judas Priest, this classic heavy metal intro. And I'm reciting the notes in my head and playing them and standing there like a stone. I'm not really moving. And everyone else in the band has their theatrics going, but not me. But once we started playing, I loosened up a little bit, and I don't recall making too many mistakes. We weren't perfect by far. We were a sloppy band, but it was great. And the next thing I knew, it was over. Before I knew it, it was just this last song, the screeching of the guitars hold out, and then boom, you're done, and you're walking off stage. And I was just in this fog for the rest of the night, and just, this is amazing. I got to keep doing it. I got to keep doing this.
I love that story. Now, I didn't see that. I went the next year, your senior year, and you were in another band with Jimmy still. And
Yes.
at this point, I knew Jimmy a little bit too. In no way can I claim we were tight or friends like you guys were bandmates. But what's funny is his family in the music business. His dad was a producer. I believe his uncle was the head of Sony Music. And my aunt is a rock journalist. So
Wow.
I would hang around at concerts my whole middle school and high school life backstage. And every once in a while, Jimmy would walk in and be like, "Hey, I know that guy." And he'd recognize me. And so we started talking, and he was in West Hill with us. And he's a lovely guy. And he was a great drummer. So, how did you transition from your one off as a heavy metal guy with Jimmy to your own band? And tell me a little bit about Illusion.
So Mayhem, we finished our show at the Battle of the Bands there in the fall of '83, and that night Jimmy and I both got fired. They had lined up a kind of a professional, more professional drummer and bass player to be in their band, and we
Right.
knew it was temporary. So they said, "Oh, thanks, guys. Good luck." And so Jimmy and I went back to just playing the two of us in his bedroom. We would jam once a week or something. But around this time in marching band, I got to know another trumpet player named Alan Chappelle. And I had known Alan in middle school. He was a year behind me. So when I was in 8th grade in the jazz band, he was in 7th grade. And he got into jazz band, which was not typical for a 7th grader. And I'm like, who's this kid? As soon as I heard him play, I'm like, he's really good. He knows what he's doing. And so Alan played the trumpet, but he also played the keyboard. And I just remember sometime after that Battle of Bands, a week or two later, I'd be, hey, Alan, you want to join Jimmy and me in a band? I had nothing to sell him. We didn't have a name at that point. We were playing the same 4 tune that didn't have any keyboard parts. So it was like, you want to be in the band? And he said, yeah. So the three of us started jamming together, and talent show came up in February of '84. And so we found a singer, another guy in the marching band. Yeah, I can sing for you guys. So we did a little 2-set thing with a couple of Police tunes, and that was fun. And then there was another Battle of the Bands coming up later that spring, and our singer had left, but we definitely wanted to be in it. Jimmy and I were hooked. Alan knew he wanted to do this as well. Okay, we got to find a singer. And there was a woman at our high school, Laura, who was a great vocalist, and she had been in a number of Battle of the Bands before, and probably had won Best Vocalist in the past and stuff. And I knew her, I had classes with her, Alan knew her, and she was not in a band that semester for some reason. These bands in high school were very amorphous. So we asked, Laura, you want to be in our band? And she said, yeah, which was great. Well, we got star power now. So we changed our repertoire around a little bit to give some songs that featured the keyboards, because Alan was such a good keyboard player, and her vocal. We did a couple tunes like All My Love by Led Zeppelin and Tell Me What You Want by Zebra. We're rehearsing and everything's going great. And I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. We're going to, well, we might win this thing. And we came up with the name Illusion somehow. I don't. So we get to the Battle of the Bands, and again, it was in the auditorium, and we go on second or third or something, and everything just goes wrong. We hadn't been playing together for that long. We had no stage presence. My guitar went out of tune, horribly out of tune. Alan had a keyboard solo built in. He played a little Rick Wakeman, sweetest songs. And I stood there and I'm fiddling with the amp, trying to set up for the next song. And the judges just reamed us out. They said, you guys, this is terrible. And we didn't come in last, but it was by a hair that we didn't come in last out of it. And it was just a disappointing night. Nobody really had any fun. I think we broke up that night. We just stopped calling each other. Like, this isn't work. So Illusion had its one big concert. And then the summer came, and I tried joining other bands. By that point, I knew quite a few musicians through the Battle of Bands, through school and everything. I jammed with some people. We'd go someplace for a week or two and fall apart. And the same thing happened with Jimmy. He jammed with some groups, but nothing really worked. And then Alan transferred to Catholic High. And Catholic was a musical wasteland. They didn't have a real big music program there. So he's at the school. He doesn't really know any musicians. And so when we get back to school in the fall of '84, it was, let's try this again. All three of us couldn't find anything that kind of suited what we wanted to do. So enough time had passed. We had forgotten the disaster. So we start jamming again. And we realized this is good. This is the band we wanted to be. So Illusion was back in the fall of '84. And we needed a bass player. And Alan knew the one musician at Catholic High who could play bass. This guy, Tim, he joined our group. And it was great. It really clicked. That kind of became the Illusion lineup that lasted for about a year.
And was Laura still the singer?
No, well,
Laura?
Laura, when we broke up,
Yeah.
Laura moved out. She
went
ended
on.
up being in a bunch of different bands.
Yeah, because I don't remember her in the show that I saw.
She was in a different band at that point. Again, great singer, but just it was a bad fit for us.
Yeah. So who'd you get to sing?
Alan said, let me try it. And he ended up doing it, and he was pretty good at it. And why did we not have Alan sing from the beginning?
Right.
But maybe we thought just keyboard player. So Alan said he was going to sing, play keyboard. And so we were foursome. at that point. And we started, again, diving into a lot of Police tunes, some Van Halen tunes. Jump was really big. 1984, that album had come out. So we played All Wait and Jump, those Van Halen songs that featured the keyboards for Alan. And we know there's a Battle of the Bands coming, so we start gearing up for that. And then came the kind of the magical moment. We're rehearsing one day, and I think the battle at that point was maybe a month away. And we get to the end, and Alan says, "Hey, I want to introduce another song to the band." And we're like, "Okay, great." The Police tune, we're probably 7 or 8 we hadn't played yet of the 50. Or Van Halen. He says, "No, I wrote a song." I was like, "You wrote a song? You're not allowed to do that. You're a 16-year-old high school kid. You can't songs." "Oh, here it is." And he hands out, he had charts. He had on a notebook paper, he had chord. And this one's 4 measures, 4 beats. This is 8 beat stuff. He had lyrics. And I'm looking at it. I'm going, my mind, I just couldn't comprehend that a 16-year-old kid could write a song with verses and choruses, and he had the chord charts out. And he was explaining it to us. And he says, "Okay, so it's going to start, Charlie, you're going to play a solo, then we're going to do a couple verses chorus, there's going to be a keyboard solo in the middle, and then we're going to out." And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, a solo? To start improvising on the guitar was not my strength at that point. And so I was like, wow, I don't know if this is going to work. But we start playing the song, and it was just a great tune. It was a sound that we didn't really have before. Again, it featured a lot of Alan's keyboards. The guitar was a complementary sound to it, but it was really different. And from the beginning, I'm like, this is great. And I could do it. I could really do it. So I went home that first night and kind of, how am I going to compose this 16-bar intro? And an hour later, I had, and that was all it took.
That's amazing. That's when I saw you. So you played that Battle of the Bands. I don't think you won, but you may have come in second if my
Came in
memory
second, yep.
serves. And Alan was awesome. To be fair, Alan is a professional musician today, and
Yes.
he has released a number of really commercially viable songs under the name Chappelle, his last name. I have a number of them downloaded on my phone. He grew up nearby me when we were kids, so I knew him a little bit too. And the original song that started you on
Yes.
your personal journey of writing music, even though you hadn't written that song. Did that start your songwriting right off from there? Or did it take a little while longer to percolate?
Oh, definitely. Once that song came together, and it was like the light bulb went off. The process had been modeled for me. This is how you do it. You write some lyrics, you write some chords, and you try things out. And I got over that hump that I can't do it because I'm only 17 years old. And so I did. One night, I remember I was watching MTV, and I would have my guitar, and 38 Special came on MTV, and I started playing along with it. And I said, I think I can turn this into something. So I ripped off some chord, changed it a little bit, and I had written a ballad about missing a girl called Lost and Lonely. And again, a little bit different than what we were doing in Illusion. But I brought it to the band a few weeks later, and I explained it to them, and they're like, "Yeah, let's do it. It sounds all right." And it came together. And I credit those guys with not laughing me out of the room when they saw the lyrics and when they heard it. And it was a very sappy song, but that kind of started the process.
The reason it's important that we note that you started writing your own songs too is now you have you and Alan writing songs. Jimmy's dad is a world-class record producer.
Yes.
And this leads you to doing something that very few people get to do. Can you talk about your first experience in a recording studio?
Being friends with Jimmy and having in the band, I took it all for granted that, of course, every drummer you play with, their father's this wonderful record producer and has gold and platinum albums on the wall near the practice room. But
Has a practice room, mind
it's a
you.
practice. Yeah, Jimmy
Like,
has.
not every kid has that.
So by the spring of my senior year, so the early '85, Alan had written about 3 or 4 songs. I had a song, and Jimmy, he lived right next to this world-class 24-track studio, state of the art, and you would never know it. It was an old farm and an old barn, no sign or anything. Jimmy did some work for them. He would feed the horses. They had horses on the property. He'd mow the lawn, and I'm sure there was a connection with his father as well. But Jimmy, somehow he talked his way into them giving us some free studio time. So we scheduled a day in January of 1985, we got 1 day in the studio. And it was during a school day, which was tough because I had to ask my parents if I could skip school to go play music. Luckily, they said yes, but I was on edge. We show up in the morning, and again, state of the art, this huge console board, 24-track, 2-inch tape deck, rack mounted gear everywhere. They had a big live room, and what really got me is they gave us an engineer, and then the owner of the studio helped us out, and they treated us like professionals. which was great. We'd never been in a studio before, but they set us up, they mic us up, they tell us things how to do it. And then Mr. Einer at one point came in, and once he came in, I think we started recording. He took over as our producer. And again, at the time, you think it's his dad coming to see what we're doing. But I remember we're recording, and pretty quickly he put his stamp on things about how to overdub, how we were gonna do background vocal, which we had never considered before. Alan was the only singer, so I didn't sing, nobody else did. But Mr. Einer said, okay, now you did the main we're gonna go some backing vocal. Alan was a little, what do I do? And then he said, let's go to the piano, let's figure out the melody, and okay, sing that. And it was wild to have this world-class producer working with a couple of teenage kids on a random day. We had one day and we recorded Alan's song, Our Love, which we had played at the Battle of the Bands. So that was the only one that was really ready to go.
Right.
And then eventually that summer, after I'd graduated, Jimmy talked his way into 2 more full days in the studio. And that's when we recorded 3 more songs, and then did a mix down of all 4 and got the 4-song EP going. And again, Mr. Einer was in the studio both days with us, and it was a masterclass in how to record. Just the stuff he heard. At one point, we're playing a song, and it had a little drum fill, and he thought, it needs more punch. And he, go get a synthesizer, plug it into this noise gate. We're going to put some pink noise and gate it, and it was amazing. He'd make these great sounds out of nowhere. And Jimmy, we need a tambourine. Go in there, get the tambourine going. And then I had a couple of solos, and he had me play them a few different ways. And so it was just incredible. And same with the mix down. He did our mix for us the second time. And that the process of how we had probably 20 of the 24 tracks filled, and how he starts with just the bass drum. For an hour, all we hear is the bass drum, and he's EQing it and adding the cymbal in this and taking stuff out. And it was this non-linear process of mixing the song. And I was just in awe that Mr. Einer was doing this for us. And
amazing.
In the end,
do you still have a copy of that tape?
I do. I have the songs. I have them on my computer. I can send them to you.
So this is a lot and very exciting for me. Just listen. And all these stories, again, in this book, which I definitely recommend, a great read. The next question is just during that time, what kind of music are you listening to? I know you're playing songs by Van Halen, The Police. It felt to me like you were a prog rock guy. So how did you make that transition from Led Zeppelin to playing jazz in the jazz band to prog rock?
So prog rock was something I had always loved, but to me, it just seemed so over the top that playing it was not something I really considered, but I loved it. And again, back to when I was about 10 or 11 years old in my old neighborhood, one of the older kids came up to me and my friend Brett, who was my guitarist, right? He's going to be a guitarist. Sure. Eric comes up to us and says, hey, I got a new album. You want to come listen to it? And he lived kind of the next street over, which might as well have been a world over, because it was a 5-minute walk and everything. But Brett and I, we take the walk to his house. Eric brings us into his room, and he had just gotten, I think it was Relayer by Yes, the album. And he put it on and he plays it for us. And again, I could not believe what I was hearing. I didn't understand it, but it sounded so wonderful. Just the harmony really what got me. And then the lyrics were weird. Led Zeppelin lyrics were good. They're fairly straightforward. I knew what they were about. Yes, lyrics were just bizarre oral landscape that I didn't understand.
For me, Rush was the prog rock band. Like that was as far as I was willing to go on prog rock, because they were kind of prog rock, kind of heavy metal, kind of rock and roll. Rush, I really locked into pretty early, thanks in large part to Sal and Steve Gonza, who turned me on to Rush originally. So for you, Rush also a big part of your early listening, correct?
Correct, yeah. And Rush was a common band that people covered at the Battle of the Bands. Usually every one of those competitions, least one or two bands was doing YYZ or Spirit of Radio or Tom Sawyer. And I loved that too. I think when I started playing guitar, I gravitated towards Steve Howe in the back of my mind. I really enjoyed his playing. And I think part of that was growing up, I'd spent a lot of time listening to Chet Atkins in my dad's car. And I know Steve Howe, that was a big influence on him, the hybrid picking and the country influence and stuff. So I picked up on that sound in Steve Howe, and it got to me. I
Yeah.
love Alex Lifeson. I love Rush and everything, but I think of all the guitarists that I've ever wanted to emulate, Steve Howe is the one that I've tried and not succeeded, but
Understood. But isn't that, in fact, now thinking about it, isn't that the first time you ever played guitar in public? A Steve Howe song you tried to play
yes. Oh gosh.
at a Boy Scout camp?
Yes. Yeah. So that was my,
I
right.
know a lot more about you than I
Yeah.
should because of this book that you should all go out and buy.
If I remember before the Battle of the Bands, it was around the same time I played bass in Mayhem. So I was playing guitar and I was at a Boy Scout camporee down in Cove Island. And there was a big campfire that night and they were looking for people to do things, to sing or play guitar. And I had let it be known to some of the leaders in the troop, oh yeah, I can play guitar. And somebody had a guitar, an acoustic guitar, which this big bulky Yamaha, which it was way too big for me. And it was big. And I had never really played the acoustic, right? I played the Telecaster, but I was, again, trying to impress a girl who's at
As
the
you will.
camporee there. And I said, sure, I'll play it at the camporee. Why not? I got a perfect song. It's a Steve Howe song, Mood for a Day. Even though I hadn't really practiced it enough, I could play it on my Telecaster. Maybe I could get through it on a perfect day, but so I have this big Yamaha acoustic. I'm like, I try to practice during the day. I'm like, it's going to be sketchy, but I think I'll get through it. And then campfire comes and it's nighttime and I get introduced. Oh, now from Troop 9, Charlie Trantanella is going to play a song for us. And I'm just scared to death. To me, there were 1,000 people in the audience, or probably 50, but it just,
Right.
all eyes were on me. And I sit down on this little camp stool that's totally uncomfortable. And I got the guitar in my lap and my arms are at an awkward angle because it's so big. And I'm like, here goes nothing. And for about 5 seconds, it worked. Yeah, the intro to that is pretty straightforward, just a couple chords. Then it gets into the single string stuff, and the wheels came off the bus. And I was making mistake after mistake. And then I made the biggest sin you can do as a musician. I got to the middle and I stopped because I was so lost where I was supposed to go next. I couldn't see because it was so dark. And so I stopped. I said, I'm sorry, I cannot see the guitar. Can I get a light? And the one thing you never want to do is ask a group of Boy Scout campers to turn on a flashlight because in a nanosecond, I'm hit with about 15 high-powered flashlights. Some hit the guitar, some hit me in the face, and I can't see any better. Bright, but I can't.
Yeah.
It went from dark can't see to bright can't see. And so the sweat, I'm sure, is pouring down my face. And I somehow get to the end, and I finish. And I just want to run out of there as soon as I can. And then from the back row, I hear these two guys go, all right, man. Yes, that's awesome. And I was like, wow, that's great. They knew I struggled and they gave me a shout out at the end. So I felt okay.
That's so. If I can pull back a little bit, we're focusing on very specific incidents in your life. You always seemed like a fairly reserved guy. I didn't know you that well, so I'm not going to pretend that I have the insight. You talked about being deathly nervous when you played with Mayhem in that first band, but that was because you were under rehearsed. When you started playing with Illusion, did you have that same type of nerves? What made you really want to just put yourself out there and perform? Because playing guitar, you can do privately. Playing guitar in a band, you can do privately. But it's hard to stay in a band if you're not playing out because people generally want to get feedback. What was the journey like for you to become a performance oriented musician?
That's a great question. I definitely, like you said, when I started playing and being very nervous, and it showed that first time I played with Mayhem, I stood there like a stone and didn't move. I think the turning point was that horrible Battle of the Bands when the next one I played in, when we did so terribly and I, no stage presence and I was, doing the wrong thing and the guitar went out of tune. I think after that, The weeks and months when I wasn't playing with Illusion, I was disappointed in myself that I didn't do better because we were fairly well rehearsed at that point, and we should have done better. So I think that was a turning point. And then when Illusion got back together and we started again playing the same tunes, the Police tunes, and by then I was very comfortable just in my own ability. I think by then I'd been playing guitar for a couple of years, and it finally made sense. I felt like I could do it reasonably well. And so it was just experience overall. Having a bad experience to force me to rethink this, and then having the good experience of just practicing over months of time and repetition of the songs.
Now, we'll take pause on your performances. During high school and college, did you go see a lot of live music?
High school, I didn't see many concerts. I saw that triple bill, and I remember seeing The Firm just before I graduated. In college, I did go to a lot more concerts. Boston, a lot of bands came through, and a lot of my friends, who, especially ones who had cars, I didn't never had a car. They were really into concerts, so we'd go to Providence Civic Center. We'd go to Great Woods. It was called Great Woods at the time.
Sure.
Now I think
The
Xfinity Arena.
Xfinity.
I never went to Worcester, but there were also some places in Boston, the Orpheum, the Lang Center, and things like that. So I did see quite a few more shows in college.
Any that stand out?
Let's see. REM was pretty fantastic. I saw REM at the Lang Center.
What year do you remember?
I think it was either 86 or 87. So I think it was Life's Rich Pageant had
Yeah.
just come out. And that was an amazing show. Great sound. We didn't have great seats, but it was great sound. I saw Fleetwood Mac. A friend of mine had won tickets to see Fleetwood Mac at I think at the Boston Garden. And I'm excited because the ticket win from a radio station came with a pre-party, and you might meet someone from the band. And so there were about 20 ticket winners from the radio station, and we go to this pre-party, and nobody from Fleetwood Mac ever showed up. And Tufts had a concert every spring, and I managed to go to two of them, and those were probably the best shows I saw during my time in college. The first year I was a junior, it was Stevie Ray Vaughan
Oh,
again, and it was the couldn't stand the weather. And then the year after was the Robert Cray Band. Really,
love him too.
yeah.
Seen him 4 or 5 times. Now, who do you think you've seen the most live?
So there's a few bands I've seen 3 times. I've seen Yes, Rush 3 times, and the Tragically Hip. I was really into the Tragically Hip for a while.
Oh my, Charlie. They're one of my all-time favorite bands. A couple episodes ago, I talked with a Canadian friend of mine, and we deep dove into the Hip. The Hip is one of my all-time favorite bands. So you saw them 3 times.
I did, but the band I saw the most, and I would go see them again in a heartbeat, I've seen them 7 times, I think 7 or 8 times. The Princeton High School Jazz Ensemble. Every year, Berklee College of Music would put on the High School Jazz Festival. And when I was in high school, we played at this event. It would bring bands from across the country to compete. And when I went, it was very small. We competed in a classroom where we crammed our jazz band into a classroom. There were 2 judges, and I think my aunt and uncle, because they lived nearby, came to watch. And that was about it. But I started going to see this high school jazz festival again, I want to say around 2007, 2008, when I was teaching high school. And it had expanded tenfold, and it was now held in both the Heinz Convention Center, and there were 150, 200 bands from across the country. And the first year I stumbled onto this band, the Princeton High School Jazz Ensemble, public high school in Princeton, New Jersey. And their band must have been 80 or 90 people. And they were just fantastic. And they won the whole thing. They were the number 1 band out of 150 or something. And every year I would make it a point to go see the Princeton High School Jazz Ensemble. And it was always a rotating lineup, right? Kids would graduate, new kids would come in, and they were always just fantastic. They would play big band stuff, a lot of Duke Ellington, and I tried to see them every year. And they always drew the biggest crowd. They put them in the biggest room, standing room only, and they'd play their 20-minute set. And I wish they still had that competition, because I would go see the Princeton Jazz Ensemble.
So you went to college in Boston, and then you went to Arizona for graduate school.
Yes,
In Arizona, you picked up live music again.
I did. I picked up the guitar, playing the guitar again, and live music. And I was in Tucson, and live music was a big part of the scene there, right? Tucson, there was no professional sports team. We had the college team, University of Arizona, which was great from a sports perspective, but the local music there was like I hadn't seen in Boston. It was just everywhere. There were all sorts of bands playing, and they would play at places I could afford, $2 cover and a $5 pitcher of beer, call it a night. And my wife and I and my friends, we would start seeing these bands just on a Friday, Saturday night, random bands, and piqued my interest again. And I'm like, wow, I remember this used to be fun playing guitar. And so I would watch these bands and then go home and one day I just picked up the guitar again and said, you know what? I got to start playing because it was fun. By that point, I was starting over. So I started over with my method book and just listening to music and playing along. And I got really back into it and we saw more bands. And then eventually I met some other musicians and it was like, hey, let's do this. The bands we were seeing were good. They were certainly not, none of them were going to make it, but it was that they were entertaining and some of them they would get the cover. They'd make 20, $30 a night. And as a grad student, I'm like, I could use $30 from playing music.
Were they playing cover songs or originals or both?
Both. So there were definitely a few bands that did all original that were really good, and there were a lot of other cover bands. Half the time you couldn't tell by the name, and we'd go see a band, and oh, okay, this is a cover band.
And then at some point, did you seek out other musicians? I know one of your stories in your book, Sister Christian Has Left the Building, is about your re-engaging with music publicly.
But there was a summer I spent in Tucson. I usually came back east for an internship during the summer, but one summer of '92, I stayed in Tucson on campus and taught. And there were some other grad students around for the summer. And one night we're just talking, and I found out this other guy, Wayne, he plays guitar. And so we say, well, let's start jamming. And he knew a drummer. And so we go to the drummer's house and we start jamming. And we were awful, just awful. The drummer couldn't keep time. I wasn't really back into the swing of things yet. Dwayne wasn't much better, but it was fun. And then school started up, and I said, you know what? I'm going to try to make music again. I don't want to be in a band with two guitarists and a drummer that can't play. I want to try to do my own thing. So I took a big leap of faith and put an ad in the local paper, basically saying, I need a drummer, a bass player, a singer, place to rehearse, but I'm a guitarist if you want to play. And I was not prepared for the responses. I got a lot of responses and I met a lot of really strange people. And it was depressing in a way because the phone starts ringing off the hook, which was great. But then you start meeting these people and I'm like, this is just not going to work. I didn't meet any real great musicians. The personality didn't work until I met this drummer named Janice. And she was a little bit older than me, which I felt was good. She had some young kids. So I'm like, okay, this is a stable person, unlike some of the other stable people I've been meeting. I went over her house, and at that point, I also knew a bass player from the Dwayne debacle, and so we started jamming, and it worked. It was just fun. Again, it was easy. Janice liked the Police. She liked a lot of other stuff, Tom Petty, The Alarm. So we had easy songs we could play together. And then we picked up this other guy, Jerry, who again was from the summer era. He played with us. And when that band folded, somehow we had Jerry's number lying around. So after rehearsing with Janice and realizing this could work, we called, hey, Jerry, band, you want to join it? And he was all in. And so we were 4 people at that point. This was probably the fall of '92 or '93. I can't,
Doesn't
the
matter.
years went together, but we were 4 people and we settled on a name, The Distant Few. I like to say our fans were distant and few. And we started again a lot of covers, but I started writing again. And this is when I really caught my groove. I had written a little bit more in high school, but nothing really worked. But when I started playing with this band in Tucson and seeing again more original act and hearing kind of original music, and the ideas just started coming, and I started writing. And then I met Jerry as a writer. Jerry was the singer, but he was, in the classical sense, he was not a musician. He didn't know how to read music. He had never taken music there before, but he was a musician because he knew so much about sound and about song structure and about harmony and just he was really big into a lot of bands, Grateful Dead, Fish. He was big into a lot of these bands, and he would just study their music, the lyrics and the harmonies. And I started writing music, and then he started writing music. And then we soon collaborated and realized that it was working, something wonderful. And he's been my songwriting partner ever since 1992.
You've released 3 records under the name A Vivid Sun,
A Vivid Sun, yeah.
and you have a 4th collection coming out at some point.
Yeah, we have most of the songs written. We're just trying to figure out how to record. He's still in Tucson. I'm here on the East Coast. So it's just the logistics of it, but we'll get there.
And some of that music is available on YouTube, correct?
Yes.
Under A Vivid Sun. We got to get all that music out on Apple Music and Spotify next. Come on. I want to hear it. I want to download it. I want to listen. You played out in Arizona?
We did. We started out, we played a lot of parties. The drummer, Janice, she was big on the Tucson music scene, the underground scene. So she had a lot of friends who were musicians. And that was a big way to get going. With someone have a party and they'd invite you to play. So we did a lot of parties. We did a lot of free concerts in the park. And about 9 or 10 months into it, we made a demo tape. And then we could start trying to market ourselves to clubs and bars. And we ended up getting some gigs, not many, mainly because I was in charge of the marketing. And I was just talk about nerves and everything. I am not the person that should be walking up to managers and booking agents and saying, "Hi, would you like to book us?" Because I just melt into a sea of shyness.
To help our listeners understand, you didn't go to graduate school for music theory, for composition. You went to become an engineer, correct?
Correct. I studied theoretical electromagnetics. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very different.
And then you had a fulfilling career as an engineer, correct?
I did, yes.
But you've now retired and are making music.
Yeah, I play every day still, play guitar every day. Writing with Jerry, he's constantly sending me lyrics. And the way he writes music, he'll write lyrics and then he'll explain things to me, like how he hears the song in his head. He's like, this kind of a beat sounds a lot like this Beatles tune or this Linda Ronstadt tune or something. And he lets me figure it out. It's such a wonderful process to be able to do that.
Do you still see concerts?
I haven't been to any big arena concert really since COVID, but I do seek out live music every once in a while. The one that I look forward to every year, I live near Lowell, Massachusetts, and every year in July they have the Lowell Folk Festival, which brings in these folk bands from around the world over a 3-day period. They play on multiple stages, and my wife and I love going to that. The music is so different, so eclectic. There's a lot of traditional music from just every corner of the globe, and you never know what you're going to get. We really love going to that and just spending the day listening to different bands that I've never heard of before, and they're playing a lot of traditional folk music. They have a dance pavilion. Some of the music you can dance to. Others is just small kind of quartet on the lawn of a church, and fantastic.
When was the last time you played live?
So as I've played a little bit live as a solo artist. Unfortunately, the last time I played live was at a funeral. So a gentleman I know, he asked me to play at his son's funeral. So that was about 4 or 5 months ago. His son was a big Pink Floyd fan. I played "Wish You Were Here" on the acoustic, and that I was glad to do it. It was very somber, but I was glad I could add to that part of the service more. With my band, A Vivid Sun, I think the last time we played out was '94, just before I left Tucson, and then I haven't really played in a band that gigs since then. I've done some open mics. In town here, there was a farmer's market, and they would invite musicians to come, and I would do an hour set in the gazebo and things like that. That's probably the bulk of it. It's these one-off solo acts.
Do you miss it at all?
I do. When I get opportunities like that, I really enjoy it. I'm usually very nervous to start out with. Again, it's not like riding a bike. The nerves really get me. But there are some places in town. Again, playing at that on the gazebo on the common is a lot of fun.
Is there a band out there that you haven't ever seen that you would like to see?
I think at the top of that list would be Iron Maiden. I think that would be an epic show.
They're touring.
I saw they're coming to Worcester later this summer. That the tickets are quite expensive, but I think that to me, I think would be an incredible show. I love their music, and I think from what I hear, they play with the same enthusiasm that they always have, and just put on a great show.
I saw Iron Maiden in '85 at, of all places, Radio City Music Hall. It was great, but it was weird. Is there a venue that you would like to go see live music in that you've never been to? Is there one that stands above the rest?
I think I've thought about this, and when I was growing up and listening to Yes a lot, one of the albums I loved was Yes shows, and there was a live recording of The Gates of Delirium that is one of my all-time favorite live recordings, and they recorded that Cobo Hall in Detroit, and so that space has always held this magical feeling for me. I would love to go to Cobo Hall, and I don't even know if it still exists in the same form and see a show. But
it doesn't, but I think the building is still there. It's just called something else. Cobo Hall, by the way, Kiss recorded most of Kiss Alive there. That's a big room for Kiss. You've written 2 other books. Can you talk about those real quick?
I did. So the first book I wrote was a history book related to Tufts University. So I went to Tufts for undergrad, and as I mentioned, I was in a fraternity, and it was a very positive experience for me. And back in 2010, Tufts had started digitizing a lot of their old old photographs of the campus and everything. And I started looking through it and became enthralled with the way the campus looked in the 1870s, 1880s. And I found an old picture of my fraternity house, which looked in much better shape than when we had it. And so it was fantastic. But then I started also seeing photos of these other fraternities and stories of these other fraternities and stories on campus that I never knew existed. And they piqued my interest. So I wanted to, there's got to be, somebody must have written something about these groups. Nobody had. So in 2010, I decided I'm going to write their story. I've never written a book before, but why not? I find it interesting. I'm going to do it. And I said, it'll take me 9 months. And then 7 years later, I finished. There were about 50 or 60 student organizations I wrote about, even going back to the literary societies in the 1850s. So that was a fun process.
What's the title of that book, Charlie?
That book is called Brown and Blue and Greek, History of Fraternities, Sororities, and Early Student Organizations at Tufts University. And
Excellent.
brown and blue are the school's colors.
And that's available on Amazon, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay. And then more recently, you wrote something else.
I did. So when I was writing the book about Tufts history, one of the characters I met was a woman named Reverend Mabel McCoy Irwin. And she was one of the first women to enroll at Tufts. Tufts started out all male. Then in 1892, it went co-ed. And Reverend Irwin was one of the first 10 women to show up on campus. And one of the first things she did, so she's a divorced woman, 4 years old, shows up on campus. First thing she does, she joins a previously all-male fraternity. She turns her house into the fraternity house. And she starts a boarding class that can all eat their meals together. And I thought this was incredible. Here's 1892, the Victorian era, and this woman has just made one of the first co-ed fraternities at Tufts. So the first one at Tufts, and maybe one of the first ones in the country. And so I became fascinated with her life as an aside. And so as I was researching the book for Tufts, I started researching this woman and started in earnest, I want to say around 2013. And then I was able to find enough stuff over the years to write her life story. I wrote her biography, and that just came out a few months ago. It's called Preacher, Teacher, Hater, Fraud: The Life of Lilla Mabel Hodgkins, a.k.a. Reverend Mabel McCoy Irwin, because she was a universal preacher. Music was a big part of her life. She was a music teacher. She was a hater. She was very much into eugenics and trying to have this pure society through selective breeding. She was a big proponent of that. And she was a fraud. She passed herself off as a lot of things she was not. As a faith healer, she couldn't heal herself. She passed herself off as a medical doctor. She was not. She lied on a lot of things about her. She was a big proponent of marriage and pretty much against divorce, but she herself was married and divorced 3 times and did not really tell people that. But historically, a very interesting woman. I was enthralled by her story, glad to tell it.
And do you have another book planned?
I do not at this point, no. The first time in a while, I am not writing anything.
We skipped over your second half of your life in such a quick amount of time, but there's a lot more information in your book. Sister Christian has left the building. I loved reading it. Thank you so much, Charlie. It's great to reconnect with you and talk to you today.
Alex, thank you so much. Again, wonderful to see you and talk to you. And anytime you want to do this again, let me know.
All right. And that's it for today's conversation. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back next Tuesday. And if you like what you heard today, we'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe or follow to make sure you get notified about each new episode coming up. And please tell your friends. Also, there's a product note. I'll be releasing a playlist for every episode of the podcast. So look for the Rock and Roll Show podcast playlist on Spotify every week, featuring songs by the bands that Charlie mentioned. So check that out. Also, I want to know what you think. Please leave me a comment and I'll try to respond to everyone. The Rock and Roll Show podcast is a World Highway Media production. I'm your host, Alex Gadd. And until next time, remember that life is short, so get those concert tickets.